energy. Energy is absolutely fundamental to everything. Nothing works without energy. And then for centuries and centuries, there was virtually no change at all, and an explosion in the Industrial Revolution. And social scientists like myself spent a lot of time arguing about what caused the Industrial Revolution, what's caused this enormous increase in wealth and quality of life over the last 2 centuries. It's energy. It was access to fossil fuels. But obviously fossil fuels cause climate change. And climate change is now very, very visible. I've been working in this field for 30 years, and now everyone knows about it. It's visible day to day. This is not just about now. It's not just about the next few decades. Climate change is really forever. We're adding CO2 to the atmosphere. There are various natural processes that remove CO2 from the atmosphere over different time scales. But the mean atmospheric lifetime of CO2 is tens of thousands of years. What we're going to do now is going to be changing the climate for tens of thousands of years. So all future human generations are going to be affected by what we do now. So I think this is the defining challenge for humanity over this century, is dealing with climate change. If we don't, we lose life, large parts of the planet will become uninhabitable. Because energy is fundamental for everything, we need to ensure security of supply for energy. If we lose electricity, even for a short period in a country like this, and everything falls apart very quickly. If we lose interruptions to oil supply, we've got no diesel to ship goods around, we're in serious trouble very, very quickly. So energy security is understandably a major preoccupation of decision makers, and much more so over the last few years with first the Ukraine war and now the war in the Gulf. So we've got to think about energy security alongside climate change, and also linked to that, energy affordability. The price of energy affects the price of everything. Many people in both, obviously in developing countries, also in countries like this, are struggling to pay their energy bills, so energy prices are a major preoccupation of decision makers as well. And we still have millions of people living in energy poverty in this country. They really struggle to afford to pay their energy bills over the winter. So these things need to be considered alongside each other. And also, climate change is not the only environmental problem. All energy supplies have environmental impacts. And globally, we still have something like 800 million people or 700 million people who don't have access to electricity at all. And we have something like 2.5 billion who are still using wood and charcoal to cook rather than modern clean fuels. So climate is part of a broader concern about sustainability. Energy is part of the SDG goals for 2030, and it's central to all of them. You try to deliver healthcare in developing countries without being able to refrigerate drugs. Try to deliver access to water supply without energy to pump water. So energy underpins everything. So we've got some big challenges here. We need to deliver rapid change and decarbonise quickly, but the speeches of the energy system which obstruct the speed of that change make it difficult, and we also need to deliver security and affordability alongside sustainability. So it's a big challenge, okay? But we are making progress. So now I'm going to go through what I think is the status of where we are on the global energy transition. I'll start with some bad news and then I'll move on to the good news, okay? So bad news. Emissions are still rising, and you'll also see that major international events like the financial crisis 2008 and COVID more recently had a short-term impact, relatively modest impact on emissions, but then emissions soon regained their upward trend. Well, that matters. If COVID only delivered, for example, a sort of 5% reduction in global emissions, and we need to have a sort of 5% reduction every year going forward, which is what the sort of target we're looking at for net zero, that gives you a sense of the scale of the challenge in turning this juggernaut around and heading towards net zero. That's one bit of bad news. The other bit is that time is running out. I don't know if you've heard of this idea of a carbon budget, but the idea is that every additional ton of CO2 we put into the atmosphere adds to the warming. So the warming depends upon the total amount of CO2 we put into the atmosphere, cumulative emissions, right? So if we are to stop warming, we need to get emissions to zero, or net zero. So any residual emissions into the atmosphere are balanced by technologies that take emissions out the atmosphere. So temperatures are still rising, okay? And that means climate extremes are increasing. We're breaking records all the time. We broke records here in our June temperature only last week. This picture is for, I think, 2024. A whole bunch of records being broken around the world, extreme events, rainfall, droughts. 2024 is the hottest year on record, we keep breaking that record. And 2024, the average global temperature in 2024 was above 1.5 degrees C. So it's above the Paris target. Now the Paris target is averaged over many years, it's not just 1 year, but we're at that level now. We're more than 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial levels. The warmer it gets, the bigger the risks that we face. So for example, we're melting the sea ice at the Arctic. Sea ice is white, it reflects sunlight. If you melt it, then the ocean is blue and it absorbs sunlight, so it's absorbing more heat. If you absorb more heat, you melt more ice. If you melt more ice, you get this positive feedback setting in. And the jargon here is tipping points. Tipping points in the global climate system, beyond which we've lost control. You know, at some point, sea ice will disappear altogether in the Arctic. At some point, the Greenland ice sheet will begin irreversibly melting. At some point, the Amazon rainforest will collapse. At some point, the thermal halide circulation, or the Gulf Stream in more simple terms, that will also collapse. So we're getting closer and closer to those tipping points, which are increasingly well documented in the scientific literature. One tipping point we've probably crossed already is coral reefs. Global ocean temperatures now are sufficiently high that probably going to destroy most of the world's coral reefs, on which something like a quarter of ocean biodiversity depends, about a quarter of the global fish catch depends. However, now I switch to the good news, despite all those problems, despite all that bad news, despite what I would call the headwinds of the right-wing backlash and so on, there is a lot of momentum in the energy transition. Because things are now not looking as bad as they did 10 years ago. The business as usual trajectory 10 years ago was something like a 3.6 degrees C warming by the end of this century. Now it's about 2.7 degrees. We've shaved 1 degree off that within only 10 years as a result of partly the Paris Agreement itself, but alongside that, ongoing developments in technology which have made clean technologies much more attractive and fossil technologies less attractive. So the trajectory is coming down. It's not down to where we want it. We're not heading to 2 degrees C yet. We're still at 2.7 and there's a lot of uncertainty and everything else. But we are making progress in the right direction in terms of decarbonising the global economy. And the sort of high-end scenarios, the sort of ending up at 4 degrees C, 5 degrees C warming that were being talked about a decade ago, they are not plausible. That's not going to happen. We're not going to just be burning coal for the rest of the century. So that's good news. And the really, really good news is that the renewable energy industry is booming. The scale of deployment now is quite extraordinary, and it's accelerating, and it far exceeds the expectations of everybody who's been working in this field. We all got this wrong. Renewables alone accounts for about a third of global electricity generation. If you add on nuclear on top of that, that's about 40–45% of electricity generation globally is clean, as in no CO2. Crucially, the cost of these technologies is falling. Here we've got cost trends in 2010 for solar photovoltaics, offshore wind, onshore wind, and concentrated solar power, which is one of, I don't know if you've seen these are large arrays of mirrors in the desert typically, which reflect the sun onto a central pillar, and that's generating electricity using the usual steam turbine. But the point is, they're all getting cheaper. And the cost of solar in particular has been falling through the floor. Again, at a rate that was unanticipated by most analysts. The energy transition is really two main things. First, you've got to decarbonise electricity supply. Second, you've got to electrify most end uses. Replace fossil fuel vehicles with electric vehicles. Replace gas boilers with heat pumps. So it's electrification and decarbonisation of electricity generation. Those are the two key pillars of the energy transition. And that's happening, that's where the money is flowing, and now more money going into that than in fossil fuel exploration. And one feature of that is that we're now going beyond the sort of traditional focus of climate policy. I've talked a lot about solar and wind. Well, that's been a big focus, subsidising the deployment of renewables. But now we're starting to think about other things. How do we decarbonise the steel industry? How do we decarbonise the cement industry when CO2 is part of the process? It's not just the fossil fuels you use in cement. You actually produce CO2 as a byproduct of creating cement. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to decarbonise aviation? Aviation is one area where you really can't use electricity, at least not for long-haul aviation. We have to use some form of low-carbon fuel. How do we decarbonise shipping? How do we decarbonise the chemicals industry and use feedstocks other than oil as the basis for all the chemicals that we use? These are really tough questions, but there's lots of good news as well, which you may have missed if you just look at the headlines. There's a lot of under-the-radar good news that matters, and it shows that the energy transition is gaining momentum. We've got lots of problems at the moment, obviously, with the security and conflict and the Iran war. That might be an obstacle in the short term to the transition. In the long term, it will accelerate it. I think it's made visible the problems of relying upon fossil fuels, and it will accelerate investment towards clean technology that doesn't have that reliance upon oil exporters. Okay, I think I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you so much.